man who wins this battle, not the engine alone.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, let me say and repeat what Mark said. On behalf of the museum, I'd like to thank some of my favorite people in the museum. I always use every chance I can to shout out the docents and what you do. I really appreciate it, as does the museum. Give yourself a round of applause. But I'm here in a different capacity today, which is to tell you about this upcoming exhibition, which, just trying to explain, it's not just static things. There are stories here, dangerous things that happen and so forth. So you've got to imagine, and I think the exhibit is going to do this, that you've got this in motion. So, and I think we're going to use some of that. Before I go into the cars, why is this called Legends? Well, it's not just the cars that are the legends. It is the people who drove them and the stories that came out of it. So I want to impart some of that to you so that when you're touring, it'll be more than, here's a car. In that regard, I have something to tell you about. The catalog for this show is terrific. I've had a chance to see it. I don't have a copy yet, but it's coming out shortly. And it really is. I collect car books, as you may have gathered. And it is one of the best, if not the best, that I've ever seen. And I think it's going to sell like hotcakes. And it's also a resource for some of the stuff we're going to talk about here. There are 22 cars. There are 22 stories. I had some fun. I got to pick the writers for this thing. But I want to give a shout out for this before I move right into the stories here. The shout outs are to Amata and Gilbert, who, when I said, let's do a car show, they didn't say, you're out of your mind, reminded them, and they had not been there, of Curves of Steel, which was super successful. As you know, in about 2 months, we had 67,000 people. This show is going to go 4.5 months. If we don't get 100,000, I'll be absolutely shocked. So you're going to have a lot of people coming in from tours, not just from here. Is this unique? There's never been a show like this, no baloney. There's an automobile museum, the best in the country in Los Angeles, called the Peterson, which is right across the street from LACMA. When I showed the list of what I'm going to show you here to Terry Kargas, who's the head of that museum, he used the word astonished. He'd never seen a collection like this, and people are spreading the word. So we're going to get a lot of out-of-towners here as well. But on the shout-out, so we had Amata. We have Gilbert, who had the vision to say, go for it. There are two people, particularly one person who I'm going to embarrass, who is here right now, who worked her heart out. If you saw her desk, what's there, it's surrounded by these cars, and that's Rachel Zebro, assistant curator. Rachel, would you stand up for a minute? She's here somewhere. Oh, come on. In addition to her art background, I've turned her into a car nut. And for help on this, Adriana Milanic-Fanning, who's in charge of digital capture here, working with the education department, but everyone else has really put together this show and a lot of these things and getting the rights to using these things and so forth. So thank you as well. It's been a lot of fun to work with, and this show is going to show that. Before I jump into the cars, let me tell you something that'll be probably a fairly common question you'll get from people who know a little about cars. Why are there no NASCAR car here? NASCAR is extremely popular, okay? And why did you start with 1910, which we're going to start with, and end with 1978? All goes to one thing, which I talked to him about. The golden age of racing, which is really what this is, was pre a lot of advertising on the side of the cars. Doesn't mean it's bad, but it was just simply more cluttered, so we were trying to avoid that. So these cars are, quite frankly, a little prettier, they're simpler, they don't have, there's a few at the later end who have advertising, but a lot less of that. In terms of thanking people so that you know, these cars just didn't show up here. There are people, including two people in the Valley, who have lent them to us. One is Rob Walton, and the other is Bill Pope. Bill actually has a museum here. and people from around the country as well who were kind enough to lend us these cars, not for one day for a show, but for 4.5 months, which is kind of remarkable. So let me start with, this is my first PowerPoint, so bear with me if I goof this up. All right, so the collection we've talked about. Let's go into the first one, and if I can give you, a buzzword. What is the buzzword about this? The Survivor. The Survivor. I've never heard of a car from 1910, 1911, that's in original shape. When you see this thing and walk around it and take somebody around it, you're going to see a time capsule over 100 years old. And it really shows it. It's really, really old. But there's a great story with this. This car survived, not only in that shape, but it survived a race called a Cactus Derby. Can you imagine what the roads were like in 1910, 1911, from Los Angeles to here? There were cow paths. They were out in the desert. The fellow who drove this, Ralph Hamlin, the first time he did it, the previous year, you could also call this, if at first you don't succeed, he got lost out there. He didn't have anybody. And fortunately, a hunter came and found him, and he didn't die out there in the desert. So he didn't win that year, but eventually he won. So I think that the Survivor is a great name for this. So you will see some of the stuff. There's Ralph, not lost, but coming back. Now, let me tell you about the next car, 1913 Duesenberg. Ever heard the phrase, it's a doozy? Well, I think that's what this is about. This is a real doozy. Now, look at the American flag, or the American colors. This car won a race on the 4th of July, but driven by who? Eddie Reckenbacker, who became the first flying ace for the United States in World War I. His first job was to be a race driver, another kind of daredevil. So Eddie Reckenbacker driving this thing before the war. So you might think of this not only as a doozy, but the ace, being driven by the ace. Okay. So this has also, there he is, a war hero. So, this is a great story. This is a story, if you know anybody who is a producer, ought to be a movie. Okay. So this is a 1927 Bugatti. Let me tell you about Bugattis. This very type of Bugatti won something like 1,000 races during his career. Not this one, but this type won 1,000 races overall. Incredibly successful. But it won things like the Monaco Grand Prix, which you saw it. You saw cars driving around the streets of Monaco. This type of car won 3 times. But this car is very, very special because it's not only men who race cars, women race cars, and we're going to talk about some of them, but this is really an important woman. There is a book called The Bugatti Queen. It's a fascinating story. She, as a poor girl in France and somewhere out in the country, saw in 1903, going by her house, one of the first races, people going through in 1903. Her name was Helle Nice. Helle Nice had an interesting background. She went to Paris from a small town, and she became a dancer on stage. That was her first job. But she always loved speed. So Helle Nice wanted to get going faster, and she got to know the people at Bugatti. They let her drive, and she bought this car. Not a car like this car. This is Helle Nice's car. And Helle Nice had a great career. She not only did great in Europe, she came to the United States and was very successful running around here, sort of barnstorming, if you will. And I'm going to come and talk about the Le Mans racetrack in a minute, but keep in mind when I tell you some real successes there, Helle Nice wasn't just in the pack. She was a really good racer. In 1930, a lot of people could try this over and over again. In this car, she came in third at Le Mans. That is a big deal, and she kept going and going. Unfortunately, and here's the tragedy, during World War II, she was still in France, might have even been in Monaco, and somebody claimed that she was a Nazi sympathizer. It ruined her life, and the Nazis, crazy as they were, kept records of who their sympathizers were, and it was absolutely baloney. It was somebody who was jealous of her career, and basically that was a very sad end to her life because she never really came back. So it's up here and then down for the rest of her life. An extremely sad story, but boy, did she have a great life. Lynn St. James, who's a famous woman driver who lives right here, had raced in Indianapolis 10 times, is going to give a public tour, I think, in January, and I've gotten to know a wonderful person. She got to drive this very self-same car and race it, and she said it was a lot of fun and it was really different and so forth. So this is rarely shown, and this is, you will not ordinarily see this car because the owner doesn't like to part with it. So let me move on pretty quickly. There's an interesting thing on this car which you'll notice and you'll be able to show when you're touring. Look at the radiator in the front. They chose to make it the shape of a horseshoe, and you'll see that horseshoe when you see the car. That is our friend, Helly, sitting in the car. Okay, now, here is another car. Through a lot of this, there's a parallel thing going back and forth between the United States and Europe. This, you could call, I would call, American ingenuity. It is a Miller. We have a different kind of race here. Primarily, we go around in circles at Indianapolis. It's different than running around on roads. And the Miller was very, very successful. But I'll tell you how successful this one was. They took it and another Miller to Europe. Completely different kind of races, going through roads and turns, not just going one way, but turns going the other way. They went there, and this car, not set up for that, broke the track record at the Italian Grand Prix. That's pretty impressive, American ingenuity, but I'll tell you something else. Bugatti, founded by Ettore Bugatti, we just saw the Bugatti, saw this and said, so you might think of this as not only American engineering, but the sincerest form of flattery. He bought this car to go reverse engineering, and we know he bought this car because even through World War II and into the 60s, this car sat at the Bugatti factory, even if there wasn't a Bugatti anymore, so that they could steal some of the secrets for it. So that's American engineering recognized and copied. Now let me tell you something that I think is going to be a lot of fun because everybody's going to recognize it. So there he is, setter of the track record at Monza, which is the Italian Grand Prix. Now what is this? This is a Bentley. A Bentley is a great, big, powerful car. Who has seen Downton Abbey? Everybody's seen Downton Abbey. Okay, Lady Mary's first boyfriend, and then husband. If you've seen the movie, and even previous, he comes in dashing and jumps out of what? A Bentley. Okay. That is a knockoff of a real story. The Bentley Boys. Okay. Try this on for names. Wolf, with two O's, Barnato. Isn't that a phenomenal name? Wolf Barnato, in this car, together with somebody called Sir Tim Birkin, they won Le Mans. They didn't win Le Mans once, they won it 2 years in a row, which is amazing in 29 and 30. And in fact, Barnato in a different car, a Bentley, the year before actually won Le Mans 3 years in a row. So when you're touring, somebody says, wow, what is that great big thing? Because I want to tell you something, it's a third longer than those other cars. It is big. Tell them about the Bentley Boys and Downton Abbey, because that's going to resonate with people, I think. Ettore Bugatti, with these lovely little cars, one of the things I should have mentioned when you're touring with the Bugatti and you look at the dashboard. The beauty of what, they didn't have to make it faster, they made it more beautiful. There's this turned stuff on the dashboard and so forth. So Bugatti, being very envious of what Bentley was doing, said that it's the world's fastest lorry, a great big truck. He didn't think it was as pretty as his car. So, world's fastest lorry. But remember, when Barnato was winning 2 years in a row, in 30, Helly Nice was right behind him. She was third overall. Le Mans. Let me tell you something about that track, because we're going to keep coming back to that a couple times. That track isn't like going around a circle. That track is 8 miles long. You know, it's got curves all over the place that you've got to remember. Like going through the street there in Monaco, you could sort of remember that. 8 miles long is a long way. And think about this. It's 24 hours. I forgot to mention that. That means in these old cars, you're in the dark. Guess how bright the headlights were? You're zooming along at 80 or 90 or 100 miles an hour with bad headlights. You don't know who's up in front of you and so forth. So it's a real achievement back then. So that's a legend. And there is Wolf Barnado. And there's Wolf, also down below. And he liked the cars so much that he bought the company before the Depression set in. Another great story. Another brand, Alfa Romeo. They came along, and let's give this a title. David and Goliath. Why David and Goliath? Easy thing to remember, David and Goliath. Okay, before 1930s and after the Bentleys, Alfa Romeo was unbeatable. But Hitler came along and said, we're going to demonstrate the superiority of master race, and one of the ways we're going to do that is through racing cars. We're going to obliterate everyone else by the most powerful possible cars. So Alfa comes along with this car, which had been winning, and they are completely outgunned. So let me tell you a story how this happened. The German Grand Prix, the first time all the Nazi hierarchy are out standing to watch this big race where they're rolling out their big guns, there is a racer. His name is Tazio Nuvolari, and I'll show you a picture of him in a minute. He is a chain-smoking Italian who's about 5'5". Tazio Nuvolari wasn't going to buy that. He was driving an Alfa. The Alfa had probably half the horsepower and was slower, but he was a madman. He was one of the fastest drivers, perhaps one of the best drivers pre-war, probably was. Out of control. And he made the Germans chase him to the point where, at the end, their tires were shredding, and he won. This car, by the way, is owned by an art collector, a noted art collector up in the Seattle area. John Shirley collects art as well as cars. Now, let's talk for a minute. So Tazio Nuvolari wins. What kind of achievement is that? How long is that track, trying to remember how many turns? It's 16 miles long through the woods. And a later driver, a famous driver, called it the green hell because the thing is so dangerous and you've got all these curves running through there. So this is a great part of the story that you'll remember. So Tazio wins, and it used to be like the Olympics. At the end, the winner, they play the national anthem, and the Germans went, well, we don't have they expect them to win. We don't have the Italian national anthem. All we've got is the German national anthem. So what did he do? He went to his car, and he comes back. I've got the record, and he made him play the Italian national anthem. So, and you'll notice something, actually it's not facing, let me turn this around because it's the beginning of another story. Let's see. That is Tazio. That is actually a picture that Rachel and others found of that race. And we actually have some footage of that race. Okay. But let me tell you, anyway, I think that's a great story. When you see the flip side of that car, you're going to see a coat of arms. It's a yellow coat of arms with a prancing horse. That's Ferrari. Some of you may know Ferrari's symbol. Why? Well, the beginning of Ferrari, he was the team manager before he made his own car. So, beginning of Ferrari, you'll see that black horse in the yellow field. Okay. So racing stops during the war. 1952 comes along. Whoops. Click. And 1952 comes along. The Germans had never won, and Germany is completely devastated. But they put together a car, a very light car, not as fast as some of them, but very light car, and lightweight helps. And this is that car. I hope we have a picture of something. Whoops. Let me tell you about the car, and there are pictures. There was actually, there was something that said collection in the beginning. I won't back up all the way. This is called a Gullwing. Well, they wanted to make it light, so they ran tubes around the side, but there was no way to cut the doors in. So when you look at this car in the show, right, Rachel, the doors will be up and it looks like a Gullwing. So that's why this is a Gullwing Mercedes. So this German fellow won, his name's probably somewhere, but the interesting thing on this is Pierre Levay, a Frenchman, was on their heels, and he drove his car right behind for 23 hours straight. He didn't trust his co-driver. So this is the story of winning against all odds with someone else who was trying, and didn't make it. So a Gullwing, you will see the picture of the Gullwing with the doors in. Let me give you a word for the next one. Okay, 1953 Jaguar. I'm going to give you two buzzwords to remember on this. One is patina. Some of these cars have been restored. This car has been raced its whole life. It's bumpy. It shows its battle scars. And in fact, when we had the opportunity to walk through the owner's garage with all these fabulous cars, walking around with my friend Lynn St. James now, the lady racer, we looked around. Here's the fabulous car. Here's the fabulous car. What is that? And that thing is really a standout. But it demonstrates one other thing which you couldn't see from this picture, which is a word. I think somebody touched on it in that film clip. Racing improves the breed. It's really a horse racing term, but racing does develop things that then wind up being beneficial in regular cars. And what they had in this car, which helped it be so successful, was disc brakes, which nobody had done before at Le Mans. So let's see. So racing improves the breed. Patina, for sure, when you see this poor old lumpy thing that was very successful. That car was driven by none other than Stirling Moss, one of the most famous racers of all time, one of the most successful racers of all time, who actually lived in the valley for quite a while. He's moved to Florida because he has a respiratory disease, but Sir Stirling Moss was here, and that was right at the beginning of his career. So you're telling the story also, beginning, and we'll have some more on him, of Stirling Moss. The next car, and there's Stirling Moss, before he lost his hair, with a cigarette in his mouth, sitting right there. Later on, you'll see some Moss pictures as the hair was going. This is a 1953 Lancia. I think we're using this in some of our advertising stuff. It is just a gorgeous car. And what did this car win? What was the legend about that? It was driven to victory by this fella. He's got his helmet on, Piero Taruffi, whose name, if we had the helmet off, is the Silver Fox. Why? He had gray hair. Piero Taruffi. The Targa Florio, remember we talked about Le Mans as long, and then 14 miles long for the German Grand Prix? Well, in Sicily, this is 45 miles. Now, at that point, you're going, how in the world can you remember what the turn is that's coming up? So, Piero Taruffi, who was great at endurance races, long races, won that race in this very car. And you can see things, beautiful, things like rivets holding it together and so forth, purely to make it faster. So the Silver Fox won in this very, very grueling race, and he's going to come up again shortly. Okay, 1956 Maserati 250F. Why is this car in the show? Well, this car's in the show in part because I got to pick the cars, and this is one of my favorite cars. And they were very, very successful. You know, I would call this quintessential Grand Prix car in the 1950s. If you could pick one that looked like Grand Prix back then, it would be this. Let me give you a little nomenclature, by the way. Previously, we had those cars that looked more like regular cars. They didn't have open wheels like this. The way you can tell a Grand Prix car is they didn't have fenders, okay? Grand Prix, general. And so this is a Grand Prix car. This car was also driven by Moss. Now, I have a story on this, which may or may not be true, but I've heard it, so I'll let you, say that it may be true. Well, I can't prove it. he ran out of gas. He frequently did that. He was so engaged in what he was doing. Now, when you run out of gas, you're supposed to push the car yourself. I think he got some help, but he was out on the other end of the circuit and nobody saw him. But Moss won, and this was again at Monza. Remember, we had the fastest lap by the Miller. This is the Italian Grand Prix. I think form follows function. I just think this thing is beautiful. You can see it's all riveted and so forth, which is, to me, beautiful. Now, there's something, Moss, Stirling Moss, one of the most fabulous racers ever. He's the best racer who never won the world championship. He tried and he tried and he tried and he didn't win, which is pretty amazing. He just never, ever quite got there before his career was over with. Let's see. Okay, moving on. So, let me show you something here. That's on the track, and there's Moss, who has had less and less hair, but you can't tell because he's got his helmet on, looking very serious. All right, what do we have here? We have a 1957 Ferrari. Remember I said on the Alfa, the coat of arms? Now this has the shield, and it has the black prancing horse on it. This car won the Mille Miglia. Mille Miglia, what's that? In Italian, 1,000 miles. Well, we said, 45 miles. How in the world? This is a one-lap race through Italy. 1,000 miles. How in the world can you remember? Is it going left? Is it going right? Is it a blind turn? Whatever. And they won this. Moss actually won this 2 years before, and his and you had a co-driver, or actually a navigator. Well, back then they didn't have GPS, so what his navigator did, I don't know what this fellow did, was he had a spool, like a toilet paper. He rolled it out and, okay, left turn, right turn, and so forth, and did something like that, so they, which really helped him win. Remember Piero Taruffi, the Silver Fox? Piero Taruffi drove this car. He won in this car, and that's actually him winning up there in this very self-same car. So think about this, 1,000 miles through Italy. This isn't just out on the road, this is through streets. Well, what is everyone doing? This is before guardrails. People are leaning in like this, and you're going by them at 180 miles an hour through city streets and so forth. So think about that when you see this, the Silver Fox. At the end, he won this, and he hung up his goggles. That was it. One of his teammates had gotten killed. That's one reason he won. But he said, I promised my wife, that's it, and that really is it. So that was his last race of 1,000 miles for one lap. Okay. This looks pretty similar, but it's not. At the same time, Ferrari was building cars. This is the arms race going back and forth. Another company, Maserati. They made a car that was faster, but here is a takeaway. To win the race, you have to finish the race. You can be faster, but if you don't finish, you're not going to win the race. And the problem with this gorgeous car, I'm going to show you some more pictures of this, is, and I'm going to tell you about him in a minute, is that it broke. So they were faster, but they didn't win the championship because they kept breaking. They came very close. They might have been like 1 point away, but that you can't win if you don't finish. Now, let me tell you about him. Juan Manuel Fangio. Juan Manuel Fangio started racing when he was probably in his 40s or very late 30s. He was from Argentina. Coming up, it was really something to get recognized, and he came up, and then people pretty quickly realized how good he was. So he got rides with various people. He rode during the 50s with 4 different car companies, and he won the world championship 5 times. Now, that isn't just the cars. That's the person. 5-time champion. So how did we wind up with Fangio? I'm afraid I've gotten my wife, Susan, who if you haven't met her, you will meet her, to drink the Kool-Aid. So we're sitting at home one night, and I'm working on this show, and Susan says, to my not complete amazement, "You don't have a Fangio car." What? I said, she had her iPad, and I said, "Well, go find me a Fangio car." So when you think about this, she went and found a car that had been raced by Fangio, and rarely, this didn't break this time, there was a big sports car race in Florida called Sebring, and he won at Sebring as well. So think of Susan Emerson. Carter hadn't thought of a Fangio car, and she went and found it for me. And then the neat thing was, when she found one, I said, "Who owns it?" Now you got to figure out whose arm I have to twist. It actually is Bruce McCaw, who is one of our lenders, who's lending us that Gullwing Mercedes as well. So I called up Bruce and I said, "Lend me this Fangio car." And he said, "No." I said, "Well, wait a minute, Bruce, you just lent me the other one." So it took me 2 months to convince him to lend me another one. Okay, here's the story. So, okay, you got Maserati, you got, and you have Ferrari, and they're duking it out. Well, an American says, remember this back and forth, America and Europe? He says, "Wait a minute, I can build a car that can compete with the best in the world." The person who said that is, a picture of him, that guy. His name was Lance Reventlow. He's an American, but his father was a Polish prince, I think. But his mother was Barbara Hutton, the richest woman in the world at the time, which helps a little bit if you want to go build a car. So he built this car that is just drop-dead gorgeous, and it raced in the United States, but it beat the best in the world. It beat Ferrari, it beat Maserati, and he did it. And he just did it for 1 year, and he won the sports car championship in the United States, and he moved on to other things. I guess his mom probably was proud of him because he did it. There were a whole group of people in California who said, "We can do this." So I'll come back to those people. Okay, so that is called a scarab. Self-deprecating humor. What the world is a scarab? The scarab is actually, I think, an Egyptian dung beetle. So instead of having the Ferrari prancing horse, he put a dung beetle on the side of the car. Okay. When we walked through this local museum, Bill Pope, one of our lenders, when we walked through, Amada said, and she liked cars, "What is that thing?" Let's see if we have a picture inside. Yeah. See those tubes over down there? This is called a bird cage. Why a bird cage? So when you're touring, you're going to say, "Come over here. Look inside of this thing." So it's a race car. What's different? Well, lighter is better. It's faster. So they're trying to get lighter and lighter and lighter. So they made it all out of tubes. They're like little tubes like drinking straws, and when you look into it, they got the name bird cage because it literally looks like a bird cage. Once again, I'm going to give you a story that's a great story if it's true. I don't know, but I've heard this story from one of the mechanics, and I can't prove it. Okay, this particular bird cage, they were really successful for about 1 year. It was, I think, in Austria or Germany. It wasn't a race. It wasn't a huge race, being raced by somebody. But it was so far ahead, like 2 laps ahead at the end. And the pit crew holds up something saying, "Somebody's right on your tail," or whatever, "Come in for gasoline." Well, they held a sign up that said, "Cocktails." Well, obviously what they meant was, at the end of the race, come on in for cocktails. No. He pulled it and said, "Where's my drink?" So I call this the cocktail, and if that's not a true story, it's a good story. Anyway, cocktail, it's a bird cage with a cocktail car. Okay, here, coming up, is a household name. The name of the car isn't. Indianapolis 500 definitely is. And why is this one here? See the guy over here? I'm going to tell you a story about that. A.J. Foyt. That is a household name. A.J. is in his 80s. He was a tough competitor. And we have the car that he won Indianapolis in the very first time. And that was being lent to us, by the way. Museums were incredibly generous to us as well. There's a museum at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and they lent us this thing. They said, well, we could give you the 1964 winner, which is pretty cool, which was his second win, or the 61 winner. I said, why would we not have the very first winner? Of course, that's going to resonate with people. Now, I know whether you can tell, he's got a milk bottle in his hand. Back in the 30s, somebody who didn't like drinking or champagne or something or other said, give me a bottle of milk. And if that isn't Midwestern, I don't know what is. So there's a tradition, even now, when somebody wins Indianapolis, they drink the milk. So that's him doing it. But A.J. Foyt, he then went on. He was the very first person to win Indianapolis 4 times. Okay, what's this? Who knows? People say, and a lot of these cars, and to my car mind, are gorgeous. A lot of people think that the Ferrari Gto is the most beautiful sports car ever built. You can walk around and you can decide whether it is. Those cars, I'm going to tell you about her in a minute. Those cars are, come back here, are also, it shouldn't make a difference, but it does, the most valuable cars in the world. At auction, I saw one, there's only 36 of them in the world, I think. I saw one auctioned for $50 million. Not last year, but the year before, I think. Maybe it was last year. $50 million. They're so rare, and they are the end of an era. What era? Dual purpose. You could literally, maybe some did, you could drive this car on a Sunday to the racetrack and win and then drive it home. End of an era when things weren't so specialized. So this was truly dual purpose, and you should hear the sound these things make. It's just a wonderful spine thing. So another woman driver. Her husband's a racer. And I don't know how to pronounce this. I would say Marchesa, but whatever the equivalent is in French. Marchesa Annie Soisbold de Montague. I've slaughtered the French, I'm sure, but she is a de Montague. She was a tennis star, and her husband was out driving race cars. So she said, I can do that as well. And this car was raced by Annie. She only passed away a couple of years ago. Now, is that a determined looking face? I'd say yes. So this was a car that she used, and there was a race called the Paris Grand Prix, and Annie won the Paris Grand Prix. So another successful race. Now, what is this? There is a movie, just to help out our show, called Ford versus Ferrari, which is in the theaters or about to be in the theaters. What timing? Gilbert called and said, did you know this movie's coming out? I said, yeah, wow, we just made it happen for us. But okay, so when you see that movie, Henry Ford was mad because he thought he was going to buy Ferrari. And Enzo Ferrari said, yeah, we'll negotiate, and then said, go away, I'm not going to sell it. He got really mad, Henry Ford II. So he said, we're going to beat him. Well, Ford built its own car, and later we'll see one of these. But in the meantime, before their cars were successful, there was a car called the Shelby Cobra, and Shelby is in that movie, Krusty Texan, who actually won a bunch of races, that he had a really fast sports car. You're going to see a bunch of things in that movie. But it was not aerodynamic. It was sort of like the barn door, had a windshield that stuck up and so forth. So the Ferraris are faster. You saw the thing before, very, very slippery. So they couldn't win with the Ford Shelby Cobra. So they brought in somebody who's going to come, by the way, to the opening of the show, and his name is Peter Brock. Peter Brock looked at the thing and said, I've got an idea how to make this thing faster, and this is the result. So the Ferrari GTOs in the sort of the touring car class had been dominant for 3 or 4 years. Couldn't beat them. Cobras couldn't beat them because they were slower on these long straights. So guess what? That car was the first one to beat the Ferrari GTOs. This very one, not a car like that, because there's some others. And I said, where is the actual car? And Peter Brock knew the family who owned it and went and got it for me. They don't usually lend it. And they said, okay, we'll do it. Tell me, you know how this worked? Who else is in? What other cars are in? So at some point you get critical mass, and that's what happened here. So Ford versus Ferrari, before Ford wins with its own car, they get mad. So let me tell you who's in this picture. That's Shelby, that big Texan. But who is he standing next to? Bob Bondurant had the racing school here. Forever, it's still called Bondurant Racing. When you walk through the airport, you'd see ads for the Bondurant Racing School. Bob is in his 80s, and Bob won this race in this car together with another famous American driver called Dan Gurney, who we'll come to in a minute. So this is the car with Bondurant standing right there, the guy in the helmet. So it's a local person. When you're touring, a lot of you, anybody ever heard of Bondurant? Yeah, he won in this car. Not a car like this one, and he beat the Ferraris. Okay, so you saw A.J. Foyt. He won in that car. Cars like that one had won for 30 years. Okay, type of car. There's something that a guy like me would notice, and you'll notice when you see these. It's got a big long engine in the front. Okay, call this car the British Invasion. So Indy had these cars, and that was the best we had, but the British came up with a car with the engine in the back. Handled better. Lower center of gravity and everything else. So this is the British Invasion, and this is the very first car that won at Indy with an engine in the back. It was driven by a fellow by the name of Jim Clark. Anybody hear of Scottish extraction? Probably. Somewhere along the line, Jim Clark was a world champion, and he was a Scotsman. This was lent to us by the Henry Ford Museum. So if anybody here has ever been to Greenfield Village, for example, near Detroit, which Henry Ford built, they also have an automotive museum, and they were kind enough to lend us that car. But think British and Scottish with Jimmy Clark invasion. Now, okay, back and forth between Americans. So there's Jim Clark. All right, somewhat similar. I'll show you something else on this. Now we'll go back. All right, somewhat similar. You'll notice, and we see other pictures of this, the nose is different. It's a beak. This was intended to emulate the American eagle, and in fact, they called it the Eagle. And Dan Gurney, remember he won together with Bob Bondurant? Dan Gurney, a very successful driver over the years. Let me know if I'm still doing okay on time. I'll hurry it up, but there's some good stories. Dan Gurney, not that tall, he's probably a head taller than me. Very rare for a racer. Dan Gurney wanted to beat the Europeans with an American car again, a familiar thing. All right, only one American in an American car has ever won a Grand Prix. One. That car, Dan Gurney. Now, he's like 6'3". When you look inside the car, now these cars are really cramped. You're sort of laying down, looking over. But when you look inside, and maybe compare it to the Jim Clark car, because he was a little wee guy, a Scotsman, it's longer. You may not take out your tape measure, but you're going to go, come over here, let me show you something. Dan Gurney was a really tall guy. This thing is longer because it was Dan Gurney. Another museum, there is a model really like this car. She picked this one out, and you may have noticed the first PR was this car. So there's a museum called the Collier Museum in Naples, Florida, Miles Collier, and this is their star car. They said, well, you can only have it for a month. I said, no, I need it for 4.5 months. We negotiated. I found something else. This is the way the horse trading works, just like in the art world. Okay, I can borrow your Picasso if I give you something else. Found something else for them so they didn't have a great big hole, and they were kind enough to lend us this thing, I think, for the entire time. If there's a hole there, they will have rolled it out, or I will have taken it to my garage. But, all right, so there's that, and that's Dan. Okay. This is another story. This is legend. 1968 Ford Gt40. Okay, this car, remember the Bentley boys? This car is another one of the only cars, not types of cars, that ever won twice at Le Mans, and this one did. It won it in 1968. Now, Ford versus Ferrari, they finally got a winner. I think they won in 66. By that time, years is a long time for race cars. They get obsolete. Other things come along. It wasn't Ford versus Ferrari by then, it was Porsche. Porsche had never won. So the Porsches are nipping at their heels, but in 68 they won. And one of the winning drivers, by the way, I believe is the only Mexican who ever won. We'll have Mexican Americans, Mexicans who will come here. Was Pedro Rodriguez. He and his brother were famous racers, extremely successful. So this was Pedro Rodriguez, and there's another story if you remember. I'm old enough to remember Paris in 1968, riots. The whole country was up for grabs, riots in the streets. I can't remember why it was a riot. Well, they delayed Le Mans. It's usually in June. They postponed it to September. How about the time difference in September? It means it's darker sooner. What does that mean? You're racing in the dark longer. But this thing survived. So, 1969 comes along. 1969, and there's Pedro Rodriguez. 1969 comes along. Oh, this is a great story. I'll back up that in a minute. 1969 comes along. Porsche is antsy. Okay, it's time for us. We have a faster car. We're quicker. You guys are completely obsolete. But this is like the tortoise and the hare. Remember? You got to survive to win. You have to make it to the end. So Porsche had by far the fastest cars. But they kept breaking. They kept dropping out. And this one kept circling. Nobody could believe it. And then this had some problems, and it was a war. Back and forth, and back and forth, and back and forth. Trading almost every lap. At the very end, 24 hours, at the very end, this car, think about it, how many miles is that? I don't know, 2,000 miles or something like that? This car won by 1.6 seconds after 24 hours, going back and forth and back and forth. Now, if one picture captures racing for me, it's that. See the French gendarmes with their round helmets? See everyone holding up the cameras? This is the end of the race. The two winning guys surrounded by a sea of people. They have to be completely tired. Two people named Jackie. The guy on the right is Jackie X. The other one is Jackie Oliver. They're at the very end of their rope. They're surrounded by people. Isn't that a cool picture? I just think it's a phenomenal picture. After they win by 1.6 seconds. So this is the tortoise and the hare, I think. Now, here's another great story. We're almost finished. Jackie X, you have seen pictures, or you will see pictures here, of a Le Mans start. What does that mean? Everybody stands on this side like a track meet. And they run and they jump in the car. And they jump in the car and they start the car up and zoom. Very dangerous. Did this forever. Jackie X said that's too dangerous. So what did he do? He did a cakewalk. He walked across while everyone is doing this and said, I'm not going to do it. Well, he still won. It so enraged the team manager that after winning, he said, you're fired. Insubordination. You can't do that anymore. Well, the last lap. Jackie X, who's a Belgian, went on to win 5 more times. Win Le Mans. So there. But anyway. So we got 2 more cars. And I'll wrap up quickly. Okay. Look at that thing. Now, a little bit of advertising was starting to sneak in. This is a Porsche. So the Porsches finally did get faster and faster. There was a series in the United States called Can-Am, so it's Canadian American. It was completely wide open. There were no rules. Bring whatever fastest car you had. And Can-Am had gone back and forth, different brands and everything else for whatever. And when I was young and in college, I got to watch them. Okay, what is the nickname of this car? It's the Can-Am Killer. Why? Because this car was so fast that in the end, fini. Yeah, everyone else just said, okay, we're not coming anymore. We're not going to play with you. So this was the Can-Am Killer. I watched this car. I was telling somebody upstairs, one of your docents, that I got to see this back in God, I hate to say when, 73, going around a track, lap after lap after lap with this driver, Mark Donohue. Every lap, in control, coming up over a hill, getting off the ground just a little bit, and then he'd stick his landing. And then the next lap, exactly the same thing. Now, how in the world could they do that? Well, how did he win? First of all, he had 1,000 horsepower. That helped. But he had a little knob if somebody was catching. He could turn it up, and he would have 1,500 horsepower, so he scoot away. So Mark Donohue and the Can-Am killer were, it ended the series. Okay, our last car, called the John Player Special, but it was a Lotus. Remember, we had a Lotus Ford before. Okay, so what's special about this? Well, first of all, it's very pretty. It's black with gold lettering. But the thing that's special about this car is, think of it as the champ. We talked about A.J. Foyt. Well, we got another champ here. Okay. Mario Andretti. Yeah, everybody knows Mario Andretti. Okay. My wife was in advertising. She put me through law school. She did all sorts of neat things, but one of her first ads had Mario Andretti, and it was a shampoo ad or something. So she was a kid. She gets to go see Mario Andretti. And they were taking all these pictures of Mario Andretti. And when they got finished, she said it was incredibly nice. And she walked away on the track, and he came back and he gave her a kiss. Now, is that cool or what? He wasn't, manhandling her, but just said, thank you so much. And so Susan got to get a kiss from that guy, Mario Andretti. Anyway, legends. I hope I've made legends more fun. Now, I don't know, do we have any time for a question? Okay. Now, I will have to repeat the questions because I don't think we have a mic, so tell me your question.
Okay, so I'm really into all this and I'm really excited about doing it. I love curves of steel and this is going to be so much fun. My question is that you had said that Grand Prix cars don't have fenders. Okay, so that's all the way through.
Yeah.
So we do have Grand Prix cars and then we have regular track cars. I'm just trying to get the design.
Yes, the terminology. So what she said was, I had said Grand Prix cars don't have fenders, whereas things like, the last car was a Grand Prix car. Okay, no rules are simple. I'll tell you one other thing. We had the A.J. Foyt car, and we also had the Lotus, which was the British invasion. Another kind of car that doesn't have fenders is Indianapolis cars. So think of it this way. Indy cars and Grand Prix cars don't have fenders. Then if you walk up to something else and it's got fenders, like the Ferrari Gto or something, that's what I'd call a sports car, a non-Grand Prix car. Road racing cars, but I'd call it that. Other questions? Yes.
Are all these stories in the book, in the catalog?
I would say all these stories, or nearly all these stories in the book. The book is gorgeous. It is, like I said, I collect these books. This book, photographer for me, he got his car, he drove 10,000 miles, so his car lines all here. They're all over the place. They're Florida, and they're all coming here. So 10,000 miles, and he did a terrific job. So yes, the stories are in the book if you want to brush up or something. By the way, even after you look at the book, if you say, what was Carter saying? I don't see that one in the book, or another question, and now I will sit down. Give me a call. Give Lisa a call, and I'll let you know. Thank you, Lisa.